Hey fellow YoraHomers, today we're going to be assembling the YoraHome Yora CNC Carving Machine 3018 Pro. I've already unpackaged the machine and I've kind of assembled the components, or I should say organized the components together, kind of how they go. The shorter linear rails and threaded rod are for the base, the longer ones are for the gantry. These are the base components. I kind of have them together. I've also gone ahead and labeled the different hardware components. I just write in Sharpie M5 by 16 in this case, etc. for the remaining components. The kit does come with a set of Allen keys. Just in the interest of time and convenience, I use my own set with handles, a little faster. One thing you will need is you're going to need to measure 46.5 millimeters. I have a metal ruler with metric on one side. In the back of the manual, there's actually like a little ruler you can print using the settings, and if you want to use that. Otherwise, if you've got some type of metric measuring, you're going to need something to measure. So just something to bear in mind. Now, first thing we're going to do is assemble the base. I am going to follow along in the manual just to be consistent, but I'm going to show you some tips and tricks along the way. Go through the inventory, make sure you have all the parts. Last thing you want to do is get half assembled and find you're missing something. So definitely do that. But why don't we get right to it? So we are assembling the base first, and for that we're going to require the two side rails. We're going to need these linear rods, and we're going to need these 4 bearings. That's the nut seat that will be used later on the bed. We'll get to that next. Additionally, we're going to need 12 of these M5 by 16 millimeter screws. So we're also going to need the front and rear bakelite plates. The rear plate has a larger hole for the stepper motor. There are feet on the bottom, so you know the bottom to the top. This one is actually symmetrical. The front plate is not symmetrical because there's a bearing in it. The bearing points to the inside of the machine or to the rear if you're looking from the front. Again, there's feet, so this is the correct orientation for this front plate. Again, you'll notice the bearing points inwards. All you see on the front is a small hole. There is an orientation to the bearings for the bed. You'll notice these holes are not in the center, they're offset. The offset, you want them closer to the outside. So if this was a rear one, and that was a rear one, they should look like that, with the holes closer to the rear. Likewise on the front, they should be oriented like this. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to screw the front to the rails. Now anytime I assemble anything, I don't tighten, unless there's a reason, I don't tighten the bolts all the way until I kind of have things lined up. So I highly recommend you kind of take that approach with these types of complex machines, whether you hand tighten them or use a driver to kind of get it seated, but you're going to want to be able to kind of maneuver things to get everything lined up and where you want them. Unfortunately, I only have one camera right now, so the overhead view is all I can kind of offer. Future videos, I'm working on sort of a multiple angle deal so I can hopefully zoom in on some things. What I do is if there's something that I think needs a little closer visual, I'll bring it up to the camera. There will be a few points later when I do that. Alright, so I kind of have these roughly connected. The bearings, maintaining that orientation, so these holes want to be closer to the edges, so front to front, back to back. Go ahead and kind of put those guys together. And then there's a screw in the front, a screw in the back for each of them. So once you have it to this point, and it's best to build these on as flat a surface as possible. I also want to point that out. Make sure things are flush and go ahead and tighten things down. I usually do the corners, and then I'll go back and do the rods. But you can see where a handheld driver obviously makes this a little faster than those Allen keys. They'll work, but it takes less time, and you can kind of get a little more torque with these guys. All right. So that's that step. Now, here's where we're gonna have a couple tricks to cover. The first is installing the nut into the nut block with the spring on the threaded rod. So this is what I'm gonna bring in close. This is our nut block. Our nut seat. Brass bit is our nut, and then there's a spring. Now, best way to do this that I've found is you take a threaded rod, you thread it into the brass nut until it reaches just the end. Backwards. This way. Until it reaches the end. Sorry, trying to do this through the camera's a little tricky. So this is how you want that to look. Then you're going to want to take the nut seat, put the spring in it. Now you'll notice one side is flat, the other side has this slot. The slot side's the one we're after. We're going to put the spring in that hole just like that. And then we're going to take this where it's just flush. I'll line it up with a spring, so that's like that. And then if you notice, we can then push this whole assembly straight in, so it's flush like that, and then thread the rod with your other hand, thread it. And you'll see it'll come out the other side, and you'll notice this is nice and tight. That's how you want it. That's the easiest way to do that I've found. Thread this through about close to halfway, because that's where you're going to want for the bed. So that's trick number one. That's the best way I've found in installing that, and it ensures that it's nice and tight. Because sometimes some people put these and they're a thread or two out and it's too loose, and then this breaks. So you want that nice and flush. All right. Now this, the nut points forward. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to install this by putting it through the hole where the stepper goes, and then bringing it forward and just push it right through the hole in the front, just like that, just so it's kind of out of the way of the rest. Our next step is to take one of our steppers. Doesn't matter which, are the same. The wire harness, the board's going to be here on the gantry, so you want this pointing to the right. So you're going to line that. Oh, and then we need to do a coupler on this before we install it. So grab one of our couplers, and what you want to do is you want to make sure these grub screws are not protruding into the holes on either side. Loosen those up good so that there's space. Don't pull them out all the way, but enough so that they're not poking in. You can kind of look and inspect. You'll see one side there's a small hole, one side there's a big hole. Small holes for the motor shaft, big holes for the threaded rod. So once you have the grub screw backed out, line up one of the screws with the flat side on the shaft of the motor, install it, and then pull it away from the motor about 1 millimeter or 2. You definitely want to leave a little bit of a gap. Come close for this one too, because this can bind right here. So you want to leave a little gap there, and then go ahead and tighten your grub screw on that flat spot. And you want these tight, but you don't want to strip them, so you got to be kind of careful. And then if you spin it 180 degrees, there's another grub screw on the other side. You're going to leave these two loose because these are for the threaded rod. But again, make sure that it's not coming through the side, because you want that threaded rod to go all the way back into that hole. So again, our wire harness points to the right. Now we can poke that through. This is going to require 4 M3 by 14 millimeter screws. And same philosophy applies, where I generally hand thread things and get them lined up so that I have play if I need to get each one in. This one I'm going to use a tool because it's a little tight in there. Push these through. Now that they're all lined up, I can tighten them all the way. Okay. So our last step here is to bring this threaded rod and push it into the coupler. You'll notice on the front it should be flush or thereabouts. You can push it back. This one you can push back as far as it goes. But you know you got it right. It should definitely never stick out. So as long as it's flush or in a little bit, that's what you're looking for. So once you have it that way, hold it pushing in and go ahead and tighten the grub screws. Now remember this too, one on each side, and you definitely need both of them tight. All right. Next, we're going to install the bed. And I'm going to show you a trick on how to do this. The bed has 4 grooves in one side, 3 in the other. The 3 grooves are the ones that attach to these. So this guy's the center groove, and then each of these goes here and here in these grooves. So what I do for this is first I place the bed down on a table, And then we're going to be using T-nuts. And we're actually going to use all of them to secure this. I'll show you what they look like. These are the larger T-nuts in the kit. Okay. They look like this. All right, now this side has this kind of rectangular bit, and that, when the screw goes in, so this is the way it goes. We're going to slot them in like this, so this points up. And this piece, this rectangular bit, is what should come up through from underneath this groove. So that's the thing you're going to want to watch for. So there should be 10 of these. There's 2 for each piece. So we're going to put 2 in the center. And then we've got basically 4 in the outer 2. And then what I do is, and again, note the orientation. The rectangular is pointing up. The rounded side points down. Now, I just take a tool and kind of, I'll probably use a smaller one, kind of slide them down to relatively where they're going to go. So we know this guy's going in the center. And these guys go here. Now here's the trick that I've kind of found. Because these like to go in that direction, flip it over. So our feet are up now. We rotated it this way. The stepper motor you still want in the back. Although I think technically it won't matter. But just trying to keep things the way they belong. Lay this down on the bed and then move your slides to where they belong this way. Now, this moves this way, so we don't care about this dimension because it's going to be moving. The only thing we care about is that this is lined up with the center groove. That's the most critical part as far as this way goes. So line that one up first. Then look at your gap on this side and on this side and make sure you're square. So I can see I'm closer here than I am here, so I'm going to slide the whole thing over a little bit until I see basically it's equal here and here. Now you can measure this, but if you have a good eye, I mean, that's probably good enough. Again, now we're going to make sure we didn't lose this on that groove. It kind of moved, so we do this. And then what I do is I use a tool to slide these guys, and then you can push them right through the holes and just kind of move it around, and you'll get them centered nice. So I'm going to do the center one first because that's the most critical. So we need 10 of these M5 by 16s for this. So I'm going to get the center secure. Again, I don't tighten these all the way. You just want them so that they're going to hold its place at this point. Now I'm looking left to right, and if I think I need an adjustment, I might make a little bit, but I'm making sure this gap and this gap are the same. Now that I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and start the next block. These are magnetic, so that doesn't hurt. You can look straight down the hole and you can actually see that you're lined up. But place these screws. And again, I'm watching to make sure the rectangular part on these T-nuts come up. They usually do, but it's possible they don't. And if they don't, you definitely want them to. because that they won't sit flat if they're not, they won't seat right otherwise. So again, I'm just nudging the little nuts behind there so that I can get the center holes lined up. Okay. You'll see this is really a pretty quick assembly. I'm definitely showing you all the tricks I've sort of learned having put this thing together a few times. And again, you don't want to tighten all these just yet, because we're going to make sure before we kind of button it up that everything is kind of square and where it belongs. It's really important that this bed is square or the motor will struggle. So you want to make sure these things are all lined up and that, you know, it's get smooth motion. So all right, so I don't want them all tight, and I'm just gonna, you can see, you can kind of bend this. I'm gonna get this as square as possible, and I'm gonna make sure this distance and this distance, so basically the distance in the four corners you want to be the same. That's confirming your square. And make sure these aren't twisted, you know, you're just kind of making sure everything's straight. Which they are. And then I'm going to go ahead and tighten the center one first, making sure it's straight, making sure those little rectangular bits come up. I don't want to tighten this too, like you want them tight, but if you go real hard, the plastic will actually bend down. You don't want that. I'm going to go ahead and do the four corners. And then I can tighten the remaining screws. We'll bring this bed up to the camera quick just to kind of point out what I was looking at, just a little closer so you can see. Essentially, I'm inspecting to ensure that the, oh, that's never good. All right. Essentially, I'm inspecting the gap. Here, 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 and here, making sure it's equal so that this is square. I'll make a little adjustment after I bumped it. All right. So once that's done, we can go ahead and flip it back over where it belongs. On its feet. All right. So our bed's installed. All right. Next, we're going to work on the gantry, which is going to be these two plates. You'll note one plate, larger hole where the stepper motor goes. The other plate has a bearing, just like in the front. This curve points to the front. So this is the correct orientation. This bearing points to the right or the inside of the machine. This is this side. This is the right side. Again, normal, you know, this is not symmetrical, so you want to make sure that the bend, this is the correct orientation. That's back. This is front. So the bend should point towards the front. Now, we're going to be using more of these M516s, a total of 6 on this side. And then we're also going to be using these standard M5 T-nuts. We're going to need 6 of those. I'm going to demonstrate how those get installed here. First of all, the T-nut. has a rounded side, and then it has a side that has a like a rectangle or a square, similar to those bigger ones. This is how it's getting screwed in, just to show you. It's going to go like this. Now we're going to put it through the panel, but I just want to demonstrate how this goes. So, again, we know that this is the right orientation with this curved part pointing forward. So we can put a screw in, and making sure the rounded side points out. You can screw it in. Now you don't want to screw this in much. Get that in about halfway, maybe 3/4 of the way in, and that's it. And then we'll do the next one. And then there's a total of 6. All right, when you're done, again, you don't want them through all the way. You want them to be in this orientation, like that. You want them all to be sort of straight, pointing like that, because we're going to put them in these grooves. So it doesn't really matter where, but slide them in. And then kind of move this back near the rear, but not all the way. This is where that measurement is going to happen, but the first thing we're going to do is we're going to tighten them all. So I go like tight and then I back it off, maybe like half a turn. And you're going to really want to do kind of all of them. Because we have to maneuver this, so we don't want it tight just yet, but we don't want these nuts falling out either. So I'm just going to get it so that it's pretty secure. All right. So now we should still be able to move it, but it's a little stiff. That's exactly what we want. The measurement we're going to take is from the inside. Is the end of the aluminum to where this starts. And the number we're looking for is 46.5 millimeters. So I'm going to bump this up against here. Use 45. So I'm at about 49 right now. So I'm going to kind of slide this in a hair. Now I'm at 45. I'm going to go the other way. And right driver here. $46.5 is there. So I'm gently going to tighten, not all the way. I'll do like the top 3 till they're just grabbing. And then I'll tighten the bottom ones, just because sometimes it'll move. We got too many loose. Now you can go ahead and tighten this guy all the way. That's good. All right. So that's the right side of our gantry. Now we're going to assemble the rest of our gantry here. So I've already sort of separated the longer rods are for the gantry, and then these longer but smaller linear rail here And then you've got your Z-axis. And then you've got your other nut block. So we're gonna start with the Z. And we're gonna use that sort of same trick. We're gonna take our threaded rod and we're gonna thread it through until it's flush with this end, just like that. And I'll bring this one in tight too, because this is definitely something you're gonna wanna see up close. On the Z-axis, this is where the threaded rod goes. And you'll see one side's got that sort of slot. The other side's just a hole. So the side we're dealing with is this side with the slot. Now we put our spring in. You'll see there's kind of a space for it. And we use that same trick where we want this kind of flush. And we're gonna fit this on the spring and push it straight in till it's flush, and then screw it in. And you want to make sure, it's hard to do this with the camera, let me switch hands. I'm right-handed. All right, we'll do this again. So we're going to want to make sure that goes all, this brass nut goes all the way in, just like that. You can see it's all the way in. And then we turn the threaded rod. And we want to make sure that threaded rod is threading into the nut that's in here. And you'll see this should stay most of the way in. It might come out a teeny bit, but it should stay most of the way in. So just kind of like the other one, we're going to want to thread this through. You'll see it'll come out the other side. I'm going to thread this through about maybe a third of the way. We're not going to go half. Because of the way this gantry gets put together, it's a little lopsided, so we don't want to put too much force on the end of this rod. So about a third is good. Enough zoom. One of the linear rods goes in the top. One of the linear rods goes in the bottom. And that is basically ready for installation. I'm just going to put that aside for a minute. Let's get our stepper installed. So we have our second stepper motor. Now, this one, you want the wire pointing towards the back, because again, the control board's going to be here. So first we put our coupler on it, and same deal, we want to make sure that the grub screws are loose and aren't impeding this, and it's the same as the other one. There's a small hole and a big hole. The small holes for the stepper. So find a flat side on the shaft, line it up with one of the grub screws, then back it off the motor about 1 or 2 millimeters, and then tighten it, and turn it, tighten the other side. Yep, you definitely don't want this pushing against the motor. You want a little bit of a gap in between here and here. So, connector pointing back. This is where we're going to use our last 4 of these M3 screws. Push through. Again, connector pointing back. Same deal. I kind of hand tighten these guys. This one's a little easier because it's up. This is our X stepper. Once all 4 are in, we can go ahead and tighten it. Okay. Now that we have those 4 screws installed, install our rail. So we're going to need 1, 2, 3, 4 screws for this. And these are the M5/16s. Alright, so Now these you do want to tighten, get it square here, but this is actually going to take the load of the Z-axis, so we want it tight. This is our second rail that goes in the bottom hole. Make sure they're square. This one you have to check in the back. I'm feeling it, that's how I know. Alright, once we have that installed, now we got our Z-axis. So first we insert the threaded rod all the way into the stepper, and then you push the bars till they hit the holes on this side, and then you should be able to put a screw through. It's a little tricky, but one there. Now, make sure everything's good and tight on this one. Okay. So next step is we're going to be installing this side. Now again, the bearing points inside the machine. The curve points front. This is the front of the machine. This guy, we got the same deal with the 5 screws and the T-nuts, just like the other side. We use the same method. Orientation is the same way. So we're going to need 6 of those and 6 of those. So again, bearing inside, so we're going to put, and you thread them on until they're rounded side out, and you only want to thread it so that it's basically just 3/4 of the way through the nut. So just like the other one, we want these all oriented this way. So they're all sort of flat like that. And we do the same thing we did on the other side. Turned on me. Where we lay them in the slots, and we just kind of push them in. Now on this side though, this is where we got to be careful. We have the threaded rod that needs to go through the bearing, so you're going to want to feed that through. Fought me a little bit. Okay, great. And notice I didn't tighten it over here because I wanted some play and I want to verify that this is flush. So I am going to point that out, that I intentionally did not tighten that coupler. So we're going to do the same deal as we did on the other side. We're going to tighten these. And we're going to just loosen them just a little bit. So we're going to need to take that same measurement when we're done, but we're not going to do that until we have the rest of these in. So we need 4 more, which are the last 4 of our M5. So basically we're securing the 2 rods, and we're securing these aluminum rails. And you want to try and get them as, especially these, just get them as square as you can. And we'll go ahead and tighten those. And we'll tighten the 2 rods. And now I'm going to take this measurement. Again, the number we're looking for is 46.5, and I'm at 48. I need to go back some, so I'm just going to make sure these are loose enough where I can get a little movement. And I'm going to move it until I'm at 46.5, which is right there. And now I'm going to squeeze it, so I can kind of take that off. That same kind of thing. I'm not going to tighten too much on any one of these because it can cause movement. I'm just going to tighten them until they're a little snug, and then that way it won't move when I tighten them the rest of the way. So now you can go ahead and tighten them up. Alright, so the last thing we have to do for this, turn it the right way, is we're just going to tighten this up. So, just like the front, we're going to look to see that this here is flush or close. If it sticks out at all, then you've got an issue over here. You haven't probably backed your grub screws out enough. This should be flush. It shouldn't stick out, just like the front shouldn't stick out. Once you've validated that, you can just put some pressure either here or here, but just push so you know this is seated all the way, and then go ahead and tighten up your grub screws. And that makes sure that that threaded rod is good and tight. So that's that. I'm just turning this for aesthetics. You don't really need to, but our next step is going to be to install the spindle. So let's get to that. What I use, I use this little wrench that comes with it, and this is the only screw that's an M4, so it's tight when it comes. You're going to want to loosen it. Now you'll notice on this side where it threads in, you don't want to pull it so far that this comes out. This does not need to come way out, but you're going to want to back it out enough so that you can display in this clamp. The spindle has a jacket on it. You line the jacket, there's a groove in the jacket, you can line up with this groove here. The width of the jacket is the same as this, so that's how you center it. What I do is I take this tool and I gently insert it between the two. Once you've loosened this, then you can use this to kind of pry it gently, very gently. Again, the slot in the jacket lines up here. Not critical. You can, I mean, I think this can go any way, but just to be consistent with the manual, that's how I'm going to do it. So I get it lined up in the hole, and then I just turn on this wrench until it slides in. Then you can take, you don't want to, you know, screw around with it too much with the wrench, just enough, because you can actually move it once it's in. So you're going to push it through, and you're going to notice this jacket should be able to get lined up flush here. And you'll notice it's flush on the bottom as well, and then you know you're in good shape. Then you're going to tighten this down. You don't, again, you want this just tight. You don't need to torque this way down. Just tight, so that there's no movement. All right. I think the control board, that's all we really have left. So while I'm here, I'm going to demonstrate how to install the laser, because that may not be obvious to some people. All right, so I'm going to back this screw back out, and I'm going to remove the spindle. Now the laser looks a lot like this, and if you look really closely in here, you'll see there's actually little corners, and those dimensions will match this laser exactly. So you line it up with the corners, and if it's too tight, same as with the spindle, you can use this, kind of work it in here and open it up, and then there's your laser. You'll want to tighten this, but you don't have to really go crazy with the laser, because there's no force like on the spindle, so it doesn't have to be super secure. So that's how you install the laser. I'm going to put the spindle back, because that's what most folks are going to run out of the box, and that's how we're going to wire it. So I'll tighten that up. Okay. All right, so we got to do the control board, which is actually really simple. There's 4 M5x10 screws. They're the only ones that length. Then you're going to use 4 more of these T-nuts, the kind that you used on the sides here. And it's going to be more or less the same procedure, but I'm going to show you something. These are going to be tight in here. So what you're going to want to do is thread them in to the control board, and then keep tightening. You want to kind of strip that hole out, because you're going to need to be able to tighten those into the T-nuts behind them. So you don't want them binding in this, and the hole's real tight on this. So put all 4 10mm M5s through, just kind of over rotating them so they strip the hole out. Alright, once you've done that, T-nut, it's the same orientation, the rounded side out, the little kind of square side towards the board. And just, you're going to want to thread them on just a little, just enough so they stay, because these aren't as long. The good news is, though, they'll stay, so you don't have to hold them from the other side. So there's that, I suppose. Alright, once you have those on, the orientation of the board, you want the connectors for the different axes on the top, and then the power button and stuff on the bottom. And what you're going to want to do is slot, so we're going to do, the same as before. You want these sideways like that, and you're going to slot it just like we did this here. Slot it right there, and then there's no there's no measurement to this. You just kind of on this side. So if when you're looking at the front, it would be the right side, but looking at the rear, it's the left. So just offset it a little bit, and then go ahead and tighten. You can actually see how those T-nuts work when you install this. You can see kind of how they turn in that channel and grab. So, alright, there's your board. So the actual mechanical element of this is finished. So next is wiring. And this is a very easy machine to wire. You've basically got, you've got your motor power wire, and then you've got 3 stepper wires, and they're all basically the same length. So you really can't go wrong with this. One side of the stepper is a 6-pin connector, the other side is a 4-pin. The 4-pin goes into the board. If you want to go ahead and plug them all in, you can. If you want to do them one at a time, you can. It doesn't really matter. Now, if you look at the back of the board, so this is in the manual, but the board itself has the axis. So Z motor is the one all the way to the right when you're looking from the back. This is the Z motor here. Y motor is in the middle, and this is the Y here. Also note on these connectors, there's like a flat side, and then there's like a side where there's these little tabs. Make sure you line them up on the connector. There's kind of a cutout where the tabs go. They really can only go in one way, but just keep an eye on that. And then the X motor is this one. That's all the way to the left. The machine comes with this braiding that you can actually kind of wrap around your wires to neaten them up. I am designing a drag chain upgrade for this axis, but you know, if this, I mean, this doesn't move and this doesn't move, the only thing that moves is this back and forth. So you know, you just basically take your wires, and then this will wrap around them, and then you can use zip ties if you want to sort of secure them however you like. There's no real prescribed way to do it. It's just kind of whatever you want. This would be the most important one, I would say. And then also, we haven't done our motor yet, our spindle. So the spindle will also move. So that one's worth securing. This you can just cut to the length. You know, you put it on and then kind of cut it where you want. If you want to kind of go halfway and then join 2 wires, you can cut it and then bring 2 wires and then bring it the rest of the way. It's kind of flexible stuff. So the spindle power plugs in here. It's labeled sideways. It says spindle. This last red connector is for a laser. If you have a laser, it would plug in there. That's where the power to the laser comes from. So we'll plug our spindle in. This again only goes in one way, and there's a clip, so it'll kind of snap on. So let me turn the machine around. And I'll show you the spindle. Now, if you look down on the spindle, there's a little red dot right there. And that denotes positive. That makes the other one negative. So just look. And the one that has the red dot is the red wire. Now, I usually pull the plastic shroud back. I install the connector. It just pushes on. And I push the shroud over it. Do the same for the negative on the back, and then push the little silicone over it. Nice and neat. Now this is where you would use this stuff. You would gather this, bring it together, and then what I would do is I'd have a little piece that ended here, and I have a new piece that brought these 2 together, and that's generally how I would secure that. You know, and I mean, you can zip tie if you want to zip tie it, say to there. Just bear in mind, if you put your laser in and you zip tie this wire, then you're gonna need to make sure that these don't, you know, these don't short or anything. So just keep that in mind. You know, there's a clamp kit. I'm not going to go through that. It shows in the book how these work. You know, but basically they're going to slide into the slots here and give you the ability to clamp your material down. Otherwise, yeah, the next step's installing the software and going through that, which I'm not covering in this video. So hopefully you find this useful, and as always, I'm pretty active in the Facebook group. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out, but that pretty much concludes the installation from a mechanical standpoint. And yeah, you should be off to the races. So thanks for watching, and have fun with your machine. Jungle.